Well, I think we're live now. I think the actually.
That was actually a really good start. Can we
Hang
actually
on.
do that when we
To
start?
question time.
Right, so I guess I'm David Dimbleby, but we're going to be looking at Brexit from the Leave side, a Leave perspective. So we're going to. I guess I'm David Dimbleby, but we're going to be examining the arguments in favour of voting Leave. And anyone that's watching who is either undecided or Remain, feel free to post questions and comments. I did try to get some people that were pro Remain on, but unfortunately I found that
They
rather.
don't exist.
Yeah, so online it seems to be more of a Brexit type thing. So the way that I think we're going to do this is, so I've got two people on who are passionately pro-Leave, two young Conservative supporters. I personally I voted UKIP, but difference in politics there.
Ex-Conservative supporter.
Okay, ex-Conservative supporter.
What?
Potential future Conservative supporter if David Cameron resigns, but.
So that's the political views. But
there's the scoop for the evening. Robina Georgina is no longer.
Okay, so yeah, but we're going to break this up into basically three parts. Start off with the whole democracy and sovereignty type argument. Then maybe move on to the economy, the economic reasons for leaving or indeed staying, and then finish off with the controversial one, immigration. So let's start off with sovereignty. Why do you think we should leave in terms of getting democracy back? Do you think the EU is really that undemocratic?
Oh, wow. Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay.
Do you?
Well, the EU was, of course, never meant to be a democracy. When Monet and Spinelli got together and thought up the founding principles of the EU, democracy was never there. Because for them, democracy is what gave them, Hitler, Mussolini, the colonels. And so when people say, oh, the EU is anti-democratic, we can reform it, it's baked in to the whole nature of the EU. It's meant to be anti-democratic because democracy is not seen as a good thing by Eurocrats and those who are steeped in the culture of the European Union. And so if we want to get our democracy back, if we want to vote for the people who make our laws, we will have to vote Leave on the 24th of June.
But the European Parliament is elected.
But they're elected because they're just a token gesture of democracy. I mean, they have no power or actual say. They can't even decline a proposal. They can accept or they can reform and twink around the edges, but they can't even reject something as the House of Commons or even the House of Lords can.
Yeah.
Just a showpiece. Yeah, got a democratic element, tick. Just to kind of silence people like us who pick apart their lack of democracy and accountability.
Yeah, and if you read Dan Hannon's book, Why Vote Leave, which is an amazing book, and I'm not paid by Dan Hannon.
I wish I was.
There's a wonderful graph that just shows the continuous decline of turnout in every single European election. Because people realise it don't matter. They have like endless debates in the European Parliament.
Exactly.
About how we get turnout up. It's because no one cares.
I mean, the majority of people can name their MP, but no one can name their MEP. And I'm not saying that like contentious of people that aren't because they're not educated. I don't know my MEP's names, and I live and breathe for this stuff. Do you know all six? No. I don't even know one.
All I know is there was one Lib Dem MP who's been there for 30 years and now he's gone.
Oh, they're a rare breed.
Yeah, very rare.
Of course, the to play devil's advocate here, the House of Lords can propose legislation in the same way that the European Commission can. So, what if the point is that the European Union is undemocratic? Couldn't you say the same thing about the House of Lords?
Well, I mean that's true to an extent, but I don't think it's fair at all to compare those two because if the House of Lords had a fraction of the influence over our laws that the Commission has, I mean, I'd be campaigning for the House of Lords abolishment in a second. And at the moment, it's kind of the lesser of two evils. Like, yes, they are undemocratic, and yes, it needs reform, but they don't have anything like the power that the European Commission have. I mean, if the House of Commons is, by miles the most dominant legislative force in our Parliament. So if in the EU, the most dominant legislative part is unelected, whereas ours, at least our most dominant one, is elected. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they are undemocratic. They do need reform, but the European Commission is a bigger threat at the moment.
Okay,
Yeah.
so one argument that Remain would suggest is that the reason that you have the commission, which is unelected, and the parliament, which is elected, is to separate power. You have the executive, which is the commission, and the legislature, which is the parliament. So the reason that you do that is to prevent a tyranny by democracy, so to speak.
Yeah, but
Is that not an argument for?
It's a nonsensical argument because the European Commission is in itself a tyranny because, well, in this country, at least, we have a government and a civil service, and the government orders the civil service to carry out legislative functions. But the European Commission is a legislature and an executive in itself. So it proposes the legislation that it then implements with no check on its power effectively because the European Parliament is so massively underpowered.
Yeah. I suppose the whole premise of the separation of powers is that each power should be equal to keep the other two in check. But the European Commission has got, double the power of the Parliament or even the European Courts of Justice, so it completely blows that theory out the water.
Yeah, it's far too powerful. But of course, it's the nature of the system. I hate this Remain and Reform line that Burnham and Corbyn and lots of other Labour politicians are using at the moment because it just doesn't work. 40 years, and what have we got to show for it?
Exactly. I mean, if the last 10 years have been an absolute disaster for the European Union and Europe itself, I mean, if the biggest global recession since World War II, the migrant crisis on the scale we've experienced it, Greece's bankruptcy, the mass youth unemployment in the southern European countries, and even the prospect of our referendum and, the rise of the National Front of France, if all of those things combined haven't been enough to convince the European Union that maybe we'll do something wrong and maybe we do need to reform, then I really don't know what that is. And the only card we have left to play is to vote to leave.
I think
it won't just benefit us, it will benefit those other European countries that, for once the European Commission will realise that, people power, and I sound like Jeremy Corbyn now, but it can actually make a difference and they'll have to listen to the other European countries for once. Us leaving, if the European Union survives us leaving, will benefit it for a long time to go.
Yeah, and I think leaving might kickstart the reform process, like you said. It just depends whether, because Britain's always been the big block to a lot of arguments about integration and federalisation. We've been blocking a European army for years. We blocked the foreign ministry for a long time. We keep vetoing the EU budget when it comes along, but without Britain, which is institutionally strong enough to resist the EU, who's going to be the moderating force? It's just going to steamroller towards integration, isn't it?
So we are the only prickle in their side. So if we're not doing it,
who will? Well, that's why Germans are so keen to keep us in. I was talking to a German friend. They want to be stuck with the French and the Italians.
Would it be fair to say that if the European Commission was elected, then that the Remain would have a much stronger case? Let's say that they do reform
no, because I mean, sovereignty is one issue. There is still 1,000,001 other problems with the European Union. That is, for me, the most important. But that even if they were elected, they would probably still vote through unlimited immigration, the Eurozone and all that stuff. Those things would probably still happen in a democratic thing. So it would help, perhaps, but
I mean, I've heard.
We'd have to think of a new slogan.
Sorry?
We'd have to think of a new slogan, but I don't think it would win.
Yeah, I hate the current slogan, unity through diversity. It's just meaningless buzzwords. It frustrates me. I have heard it mooted. It's been rattling around the EU for some time now, but there's an idea for an elected European Commission president. But I still don't think anyone would care or even know who that person was. I really doubt it.
Like you said, the elected part of the EU, we can't name our MEPs. So even if the commissioners were elected, I doubt they're just so remote from us. Even electing them, I don't think would make it feel like the decisions were any closer.
Yeah, and the European Parliament doesn't even stand up properly for its. European parliamentarians don't stand up for their constituents. They don't see their role as British MPs. They see their role as defending the EU institutions. That's why they sit in,
I know they don't sit regionally or in any relation to
any
people that sit in terms of ideology, which I think just
it's a real problem, and of course it can't change.
So as a general concept, do you think devolution, I mean, for example, in the case of, obviously we've just had a Scottish referendum, would you say that devolution of power is generally speaking a good thing?
Yeah, definitely. I think anything that brings decision making closer to people can't be bad.
I support devolution in limited areas where, because there's some areas where you really have to decide things on a national level, foreign policy, defence, probably infrastructure spending. Maybe health and education might work well, but then again, you've got to coordinate. I'm not actually that much in favour of devolution. Tony Blair said, it would kill, or it might have been.
When was Tony Blair ever right about anything?
I can't remember who it was. Oh yeah, Donald Dewar, I think, said devolution would kill Scottish nationalism stone dead, and it doesn't. It always helps whip it up because it gives a platform for separatist movements.
Yeah, I mean, I don't so much agree with devolved parliaments and devolved institutions as I do devolution. If I had it my way, we wouldn't have a Scottish parliament, we wouldn't have a Welsh parliament. We'd just kind of cut out that middle level and
give it to councils.
Straight to councils. I think that's like an unnecessary level of bureaucracy, but I know what you mean.
Don't you think that's too low a level? Because I mean, what can a council?
No. Are you saying us plebs are too stupid to make decisions, and we need to delegate it to someone higher?
It's not that, but you've got to have a certain amount of matching. If every single council can determine a big degree of health policy,
you've got to have
big disparities.
Cooperation between different councils, but you don't have to have a uniformed, policy that kind of blanket approach to all of them. I think you have to, even with defence and stuff. You have to. It can be coherent without being standardised. I think we're going off on a bit of a tangent here.
But I think there's an agreement generally that if you take this to any degree of, if you take this to either extreme, if you have too much devolution or too much centralisation, that would be a bad thing. Is that the general point? I mean, what would be wrong in the case of a federal Europe? Because of course Switzerland has a federal system, and that seems to work okay. Is there anything really too wrong with that?
I think Georgina did the same thing there. We both went, oh no.
I just both had sighs. Sorry, you go.
Well, I mean, obviously there's so many things wrong with the federal Europe, but the biggest problem is, people don't feel European before they feel, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, whatever. In Switzerland, everyone regards themselves as Swiss, and they're happy to share power with the other cantons because they know that they're one part of a uniform bloc. But the solidarity for a demos isn't there at the European level. It's definitely there for a British level. It might not be there for a British and Scottish level, but people definitely are willing to be ruled, as opposed to the EU grant.
I just think a federal Europe, something on that scale, is just unnatural. I mean, I know I don't want to echo Boris's warnings about Hitler and the Romans and Mussolini or trying to build a federal Europe, but it is, history proves that it is a natural state, and uniting people and countries of such different cultures is just not
that's true,
possible.
I was talking pretty much.
Of course, you have Yugoslavia, which had lots of different cultures.
And exactly that ended well.
No, not really, not at all. Trying to force an identity on people. Yeah.
So if one question I did want to ask, and this is something that I hear a lot of people that are uncertain or leaning towards Remain say, they are worried about losing human rights. So as far as I'm aware, we won't actually leave the ECHR if we leave the. There's a big worry.
There's so much misunderstanding.
If we leave the EU, we're going to lose certain human rights, like the right to a fair trial, even things like workers' rights.
Yeah, no, it's nonsense, because the ECHR gives you the right to a fair trial, but the ECHR was taken largely from British law, which guaranteed the right to a fair trial. I mean, that's a trial that's been part of British legal tradition for centuries, and then we gifted it to the rest of Europe via the ECHR. No, I mean, the idea that we'd lose the right to a free trial if we left the EU. I mean, Canada's got the right to a free trial, Japan's got the right to a free trial. They're not all.
It's not, all these values aren't unique to Europe. I mean, they're just unique to any civilized country.
Western liberal democracies.
Civilized.
I think people see it as a safety break, though, that if something goes wrong, then at least we have the European Court of Justice that we can take these issues to.
We have the United Nations criminal courts. We have millions of other. We have our own criminal courts.
Yeah,
And Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. We don't need an extra European one that doesn't actually have our interests at heart.
No. And, of course, the European Court of Justice is a particularly pernicious court because it has a remit for federalisation. And so that is, it favours federalist outcomes when there's another one available. And it was set up, and Margaret Thatcher was told, oh, we'll have a European Court of Justice, it will be great, we'll be able to use it to standardise the single market and make sure trade's easier. And then it sort of rules on border decisions and all sorts of
policies
that it has no business in.
And also, like you just said, Thatcher was in favour originally of the European Court of Justice as a way of regulating free trade. The idea that the European Court of Justice upholds our human rights is just wrong, because they are there to kind of regulate.
That's not what they're there for.
Not stand up for human rights and right to fair trial and all that. It's just completely taken out of context, and we're giving it some status and we're giving it credit for our own achievements.
Yeah, we are. There's a big argument to be made that the EU is a sort of comfort blanket. It makes us feel more civilized than we think we are.
Well, every child gets rid of the blanket one day.
That's true. Very true. Oh, Robert Winfield is tweeting me. No, DHR is derived from EU.
There are actually a few questions in the live chat. One is about do you think that the European Union is going to become a superstate? So I think this is one thing. I think this is more a thing that people on the Brexit side tend to suggest, that Europe is increasingly becoming centralised, and eventually its plan is to become a United States of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Yeah, I don't like Farage that much, but he's got a great line. A flag, a currency, an anthem, a central bank, a foreign minister, common citizenship, a Supreme Court, a president, 5 of them, and free movement. I mean, the only thing that really lacks to be a country is an army, and I suspect that is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, I think people might say, oh, a federal superstate, that's nonsense, that's a complete myth. But 20, 30 years ago, if someone said that we would be sharing a common currency and talking about sharing an army, people would have said to you, oh, no, shut up, you're being absolutely ridiculous and sensationalist, that will never happen. So I think the political landscape can change so much in another 2-3 decades that we shouldn't rule out anything.
No.
Like I said, the biggest threat isn't Brexit, it's remaining in this institution that will just have unchecked power and expand into whatever it wants, because I mean it's a government without opposition. I mean, imagine if for all this stuff, I mean, I'm former Conservative supporter, but imagine if in our country, if the Conservatives or any government just went unchecked. I mean,
no, it'd be nonsense.
It's permanent bureaucracy. Why should we accept that on a European level when we would no way ever stand for it on a national one?
No. Quite right.
It's quite an interesting debate because our views are just going unopposed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm just saying yes a lot and nodding.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to stop playing devil's advocate. Maybe I need to start pretending to be a Remainer. Should I do
I'm the one that plays devil's advocate here.
Huh? What did you say? You look like Owen Jones?
No, I'm going to channel like my inner lefty.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think that is an interesting point though, because if you look at Norway, the Eurosceptics of Norway are all left wing, and of course the people opposed us joining the ECC in the first place were left wing. It's interesting that it's become a very much right wing argument to leave the EU, but of course it wasn't always the case.
No, it's true.
I mean, it's not really a debate between left and right. It's a debate between common sense and fanaticism. I mean, it just transcends any political spectrum because the EU has contempt for all ideologies and all strands of.
It's an ideology unto itself that isn't left or right. You can be a leftist or a right winger and still be in favour of the dissolution of national borders and the creation of a federal superstate. So yeah, I mean that's why you always had Tony Blair and Michael Heseltine standing on the same stage, saying the same things about the euro, that would all die if we weren't in it. Yeah.
Tony Blair, advice you can trust.
You really don't like Tony, do you?
Oh God, no. Does anyone?
Huh? That's a very strong question.
Still a thing?
I thought Tony Blair was a war criminal was only a thing that was said in hard left circles. And then, like, I've been campaigning, and Tony Blair's on one of our leaflets, as he said we'd be in trouble if we didn't join the euro. And people keep saying, oh, he's a war criminal, isn't he? And I keep thinking, wow, people really don't like Tony Blair.
No, well, Tony Blair's a bit like the EU. Hatred for him just transcends all political spectrum.
Yeah, it really
You don't
does.
need a side to hate Tony Blair.
Yeah, but I think it's a broader Labour problem that they hate their electorally successful leaders because they have some sort of love with opposition. I mean, Thatcher won us 3 elections and she's like a goddess, and then Tony Blair wins them 3 elections and he's a war criminal, murderer.
But Thatcher never started a legal war, and well, that's
the
debatable.
Belgrano was to be fair. But you know, as long as you have support in your own party, you can overcome most problems. And Tony Blair did have it, and then he left, and then they turned on him. But yeah, this is nothing to do with the EU. Nothing.
No, it's an interesting diversion, but I think
everything to do with the EU.
Yeah, absolutely everything.
But I think before maybe moving on to have a think about the economy, there's quite an interesting question in the chat, and it's asking how the Remain campaign is going to behave if we vote to leave the EU. And I think this is quite an interesting one, not just how the Remain camp's going to behave, but how the UK Parliament's going to behave, because most MPs are, of course, pro-Remain. There was a suggestion that they could use the parliamentary majority to force us to stay in the EU. Is there any credibility to that?
Very much.
I think if they have any for the British public, they won't. But I mean, I wouldn't put it past them. This whole thing has been bizarre, and it can only get more bizarre.
Yeah, I suspect they will actually use their power. I mean, we'll obviously have to leave the EU. That bit cannot be ignored. But I think they might use their majority to make sure that we stay in the single market and keep free movement of people and full adherence to every single directive and regulation and treaty. Sorry, not treaty, but every directive and regulation. I really wouldn't put it past them, you know, because there's such a long history of ignoring referenda on EU matters, not just by the EU but by national parliaments as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the EU has ignored. Well, there's several treaties that the EU has pushed through a second referendum and altered the proposals.
Yeah, of course.
I would imagine, given that there's 2 years in order for this to happen, that's a possibility that should be thought about.
I love how they say Brexit is such an uncertain leap in the dark, yet they then say there'll be 2 years exactly before we leave. It's like, how can you be so certain about an uncertain leap in the dark? But
yeah, I know. Or they say there's so much uncertainty, then they calculate to the nearest £100, 4,200. Every household will be worse off.
Yeah, Brexit is
terrible
certain, but you will be £4,513 and 14 pence worse off every single year.
Every single year, and you can cost it to every single household.
Yeah, every single
calculate population.
Really uncertain. I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Oh, I can't stand it. Thank God for Purdah. Thank God for Purdah.
Well, what's left of it?
Yeah, well, of course they managed to get that £9 million leaflet out before that. So
I was so mad at that. I was absolutely.
I know. I think that is going to so backfire, because whatever the result is now, people are just going to be able to legitimately claim that it was fixed, that government resources were pumped in to secure the result. I mean, such an own goal.
Do you really think like Bill Cash is going to stop arguing for us to leave? Yeah. I love
exactly. Do you really think some of the conservative hardliners are going to really accept this? I mean,
they weren't going to accept it anyway. But
it's opened a can of worms. If he thought this debate was going to settle the question, he was.
I remember in the transcript of the Bloomberg speech, he says, this is an issue which has divided my party but also the country, and we need to put it to rest. And it's like, he just hasn't put anything to rest at all in the slightest.
Exactly. And I don't think it really divided the country that much before, but now it certainly has.
It divided the Conservative Party, and it divided.
But now that he's inflicted that on the entire country.
Okay. So I think that's a convenient place to maybe move on to the economy. I'm not exactly sure how we can start on this, but again, I could play devil's advocate on this. That unless either of you want to give a speech on your own volition, I'm happy to play devil's advocate first if you prefer.
Yeah. Well, I think Uday should go first because he.
No, I think you should go first, Georgie.
My grasp of economics is really quite shameful.
Well, so. I mean, the argument for staying in is that a big chunk of our trade goes to the EU. It used to be 55%, I think, in 2000. It's down to 44% now, but that's still about 13% of the UK economy, and it could all be at risk. I mean, I heard Anna Soubry say our trade with the EU would go down to almost zero if we left. It's just, I'm finding it really hard to play devil's advocate because, like, I'm just annoyed. But I mean, one of the most frustrating things is the idea that we won't be able to trade on good terms with Europe when there's a £70 billion trade deficit, and those are just last year's figures. The current year is running about £9 billion a month, so it'll be about £100 billion by the end of the year. The idea they wouldn't want to maintain good trade deals is balmy. Well, they'd be stupid. Yeah. And do we really want to shut ourselves to stupid people?
I think politicians are really, really interested. Ordinary people are with the ins and outs of the EU referendum. If they're going to think that a businessman in France is going to, turn down a customer because they think, oh no, he's English or British, and the Brits, they voted to leave the European Union, so I'm going to lose money myself just to make a point. They're so wrong. I mean, ordinary people are not that politically minded or spiteful. They just want to get on and make a living. So I really think the pragmatic side of European businessmen and British businessmen and women alike will prevail there. I don't think there are going to be any huge bitter revenge tariffs or anything. I think that's all just complete nonsense.
Yeah, the idea of revenge tariffs is silly because it would hurt them more in raw
Exactly. No one's gonna hurt themselves just to prove a point.
Yeah, cut off their nose to spite their face.
Especially when they're not politicians.
Yeah, exactly.
Perhaps I wouldn't put it past the bureaucrats to impose, harsh terms on us, but ordinary businessmen, which most of our trade is with, aren't going to do that.
I mean, does everyone always act in their own best interest? I mean, some people are so ideologically driven that they may not act in a way that's consistent with their best interest. I mean, take the free market, for example. You could use this argument to suggest that if it really was true that people always acted in their own interest, then there would be no need for discrimination laws, because clearly discrimination on the basis of irrelevant criteria is something that would hurt the business owner, because they would not be employing based on merit. So if people always acted in their own best interest, why do we need discrimination law?
Well, you've got me there.
Huh?
You're not supposed to be stumped by this. This is just devil's advocate.
I think discrimination, I mean, it's happened now and it's happened before. I don't think it's going to be massively more of an issue because of Brexit.
I'm not sure I exactly buy the argument, and of course, if these people are so ideologically driven, they're willing to commit a very harmful, self-harming economic act, then why on earth are we letting them produce 60% of our legislation? What's the logic of that?
Exactly. If these are the type of people, if the Remain want to argue that yes, we will get revenge tariffs, then isn't that just an argument for not being associated with these people anyway? Like, why would we want to be in a union with people who would be that spiteful?
No, we wouldn't.
So
that's just a completely redundant argument, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to take you up on the 60% figure, because I think that's
take me up on figures.
I'm ready. Don't worry.
I'm going to take you up on the 60% figure. So the sources vary about exactly how much law is outsourced to Brussels, but you only manage to get a figure of 60% if you compare all these regulations to all the regulations we have in the UK. But the problem with that is that these regulations do not have much influence. So it's things like lead paint in children's toys. It's something that the average person does not come across. You can't compare the regulations with things like important laws on the NHS, for example. There's an influence factor here. So in that sense, I think 60% may be misleading. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm voting for Brexit, but I don't agree with every stance the Brexit campaign has made. I mean, that's a ridiculous one, because how can you compare a law against banana curvature to, a law on education or the NHS? I think it is misleading, because yes, 60% of our laws are made in Brussels, but a lot of them are statutory instruments, regulations, and little insignificant tweaks here and there that don't have much impact. But they still, it's a good figure. But I know what you mean. It is a bit misleading.
Yeah, there's a problem with the figures, because you usually use legal instruments. So, for example, that bananas directive contains more regulations than the working time directive. because of all those little legal instruments. And so it's probably not that useful. But the point is, we don't have to abide by every regulation. We just have to sort of notice them and do something about it. Directives we have to obey to the word, and they often get gold-plated here. But the point is, so many of these big policies, like the Common Agricultural Policy, the Common Fisheries Policy, free movement to people, we have no control over changing those laws. And if the British government had done a policy as silly as the Common Fisheries Policy, they'd be voted out by now, or they'd have been forced to change. So yeah.
Well, I'm going to stay on regulation and hopefully give you some more difficult questions. So another fairly good argument from the Remain side is that part of the advantage of being in the European Union is that you have a certain degree of homogeneous regulation. So all the regulations are well understood by third parties. If a third party wishes to trade with the European Union, they don't have to worry about different regulations between Slovakia and France, etc. They can just trade with the whole bloc. If we were to leave the European Union, undoubtedly over time we would adopt different regulations and there'd be a sort of divergence. So that would mean that a third party that's interested in investing in the UK, well, of course, the UK is only 10% of the market of the European Union, so that would be a hassle for them. And you could argue that, well, why would they be interested in the UK if they can still deal with 90% of the European market, which is still in existence?
That's a very interesting argument. Do you want to go first?
No, I think it's right and it's a true argument, but I mean, I'm sure.
The thing is, it's something normal countries do. They trade with each other, and then they match each other's regulations. And the big point to make here is that regionalization of these trade, well, they're not exactly agreements, trade standardization, it's done increasingly at a global level rather than the European level, the NAFTA level, the ASEAN level, the Mercosur level.
Yeah, I think even though I don't agree with TTIP at all, I mean, if anything, the beginnings of that proves that it is possible to have, regulations that apply across continents and across countries without being in political union.
No, that's true.
Even though I hope it doesn't get through, but it proves that kind of cohesion and is possible.
Yeah, Georgie made a good point, which is that so many of these things we're told that are great about the EU, and it's true. Trade standardization is a good thing, but all these things don't require political union. Universities working together doesn't require political union. Working constructively on, I don't know, climate change doesn't require political union. Absolutely
Exactly.
But I mean,
I feel like we should be challenged more here, Q.
But the point is though that if the EU was just a single market, would that be an advantage of staying in it? So, for example, one proposal is that after we leave the EU, we join EFTA in order to gain access to the single market. Would you be in support of such a proposal? Because again, the main complaint of the Remain campaign is that we're losing access to a market of 500 million people and the largest collective economy on the planet.
Yes.
So I mean, I can understand that people wouldn't want to lose access to the single market. So how do you rectify that?
I think, I mean, for me, sovereignty is the biggest issue. So if I had a choice between our current situation right now, where we're in the political union, but we do get access to the European single market, but we do have to abide by, the open door immigration policy, I would still rather. No, I'm sorry. I would rather have a situation like Norway's, where we still had open door immigration, we still had to abide by some EU laws, and we had access to the single market, but we weren't in the political union. I mean, for me, just getting out the political union is the priority. So I would happily stay in the single market, keep open door immigration if it meant we had sovereignty back. I think that's not true for a lot of people because immigration is a big.
Yeah, I mean, you said you wouldn't mind open door immigration if we got our sovereignty back, but surely a crucial part of sovereignty is controlling your own borders and being able to vote for government.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I'd rather leave EFTA, if I'm honest, and have possibly a bilateral deal that covered goods and some services, like, I don't know, turkeys or Canada's, because I'm just not in favour of the free. I'm in favour of free movement of labour. I'm in favour of people who have a job coming here, but not of free movement of people. Especially because in the future, as the Eurozone sinks, it's going to increase migratory flows hugely.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I'm using the two terms kind of interchangeably, but
which two terms?
Free movement of people and free movement of labour.
Oh well, no, I didn't notice.
I know they're different, but I just keep saying.
Huh?
But I think I didn't put it very well. But basically, if I had a choice between our situation now and Norway's, I would
Mm.
choose Norway's in a second. I would still contribute to the EU budget, still have a very liberal immigration policy if it
That's
just meant we were out of political union.
it's one of the most misleading things that they contribute to the EU budget because they choose to pay into the EU budget. So they choose to be part of, Horizon 2020. They choose to be part of certain elements
Yeah.
of the cultural policy.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
some of
like,
the European
Turkey
programs benefit them, as do some of them to us. But
exactly. But yeah, it's all opt-in rather than forcing a contribution.
and people say, "Oh, Norway have a rubbish deal, and we don't want to be Norway because they still have to. They're still in all the bad parts, but they don't get a seat at the table and they don't get to change policy." I would still rather that than our situation or any.
I could bring in the point about the influence of Norway, but I think that's quite a weak point. So instead, I'm going to give another counter argument, which is Norway is a relatively small country compared to the UK, and the problem is that Norway's never actually been in the EU. But if the UK leaves the EU, then there's an insinuation that if the UK then does well outside of the EU, that's going to cause a rise of Euroscepticism in other EU countries. So if the European Union wants to propagate its existence, it won't want a rise of Euroscepticism. So there's a good argument here that the EU will give the UK a bad deal because it wants to prevent other countries from leaving the EU, which is not the case with Norway, which has never been in the EU.
But don't you think? I don't know if I agree with that, because I think if the EU give us, out of spite, a bad deal, I think there's a lot of support for Brexit and just, notions of sovereignty across Europe, and I think it won't, water down Euroscepticism in other countries. It will stoke it up, and then people will go, oh God, it'll kind of be proof that this is how horrible the European Commission is. Why should we stay in a? I think it will help stoke up Euroscepticism rather than.
That's exactly the problem.
Yeah. Especially for people in like the Netherlands and Ireland, whose economies are very closely linked to ours. Ireland have said that even if we leave the Irish, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Taoiseach. I've never heard it pronounced. I've only ever read it.
I thought it was Taoiseach because that's how it's spelled.
Taoiseach, whatever. The Irish guy. That fella, Enda Kenny, has said that we should be part of the single market even if we leave, because Ireland's economy is so strongly linked to ours. But can I just speculate here for a minute? Because I was talking with a friend about the idea of a Nordic League of countries. It would be like Finland, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Netherlands, the UK, and Ireland, and they're all quite rich economies, quite developed, mainly services based. And I thought the idea of us in a single market, just trading without the political union, was very interesting. We could be like a potential rival to the EU.
Yeah.
And Denmark. I forgot Denmark. Get Denmark involved.
I mean, isn't that just EFTA? I mean, EFTA doesn't have Sweden in it, but it's Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein,
Macedonia, I think. It's basically a beat up EFTA. Don't forget, if us and Denmark join EFTA, I think it's either tripled or quadrupled in economic size. So we can add clout to that block and promote a sort of not an opposing force, but just provide a different blueprint, perhaps. So
the general point about the stoking up of Euroscepticism, though, is I understand the point that you made earlier, that it's in none of these car manufacturers, for example, German car manufacturers' interest for the EU to give us a bad deal, but it's in the EU's worst interest, because the EU wants to survive, and I can imagine that if the UK leaves, then that will stoke Euroscepticism elsewhere. So don't you think that that's a problem? And the EU would actually be incentivized to give us a bad deal, to sort of say, okay, we're going to give this guy a bad deal to prevent the other person from leaving.
You try this nonsense, we're going to do the same to you, kind of thing.
It's like we're a bad kid being put on the naughty step, isn't it?
We made an example of to stop other naughty children rebelling. I think that's ridiculous.
I think economic self-interest will take over.
If they do that, I'm glad we have left. But I think they'll have to give us a good deal, because otherwise, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying. I've
well.
lost my train of thought completely. But I think they will have to give us a good deal to. Otherwise, I think it will cause outrage in other European countries because there's a lot of support for Brexit.
I mean, the
in other
French
countries.
farmers,
It's
have
not
you seen them?
publicised,
They're on
but
strike all the time. German car manufacturers, I don't know if they go on strike, but they'd go on strike.
yeah,
One in every
exactly. I
5
think
cars built in
if the
Germany.
European Union wants to survive this wave of Euroscepticism across the continent, they need to be very careful of how they deal with us because I think making an example of us and being so contemptuous, well, if they want to survive, they need to treat us respectfully if we do leave and respect our democratic decision.
Yeah. I mean, Wolfgang Schäuble said as much. I mean, Jean-Claude, there's a big disconnect between not Eurosceptics but Euro-realists like Wolfgang Schäuble, who's of course German finance minister. People who are watching this who don't know, and people like Jean-Claude Juncker, like Wolfgang Schäuble said, we will respect Britain. They have their own sovereignty. They were never fully signed up to the European ideal. Then you've got like Jean-Claude Juncker saying deserters will not be welcomed back with open arms. A veiled threat. He's so mad. But have you ever seen the video of him like slapping heads of state?
No.
It's
My
there.
lord, why isn't that on billboards?
You're really missing out, Georgie. It is.
No, please send it to me.
I will do. It's
It's really
he's like pissed off his face. Like he's very drunk. Yeah. Okay.
Don't leave.
Please
don't leave. Stop violence.
Stop violence towards heads of state.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna stop playing devil's advocate for 1 second and just say that one thing that I really did notice is I was doing sort of a comparison between the number of free trade agreements the UK has through the EU and a country like Norway or Switzerland, and it's quite boggling how the fact that we don't have a trade deal with China, the US, India, Brazil, Japan, and then the largest economy we do have a trade deal with is South Korea, and even then it only managed to do it in 2011. It kind of shows that.
I'm going to sound ridiculously wishful and ignorant, but we can make them. Like, they're still emerging markets. It's not saying if we leave the EU and abandon that trade deal now that we're never going to have one with them in the future. I mean, it might take a couple of years, but it'll be worth it. And I'm not an economic expert, and I'm not going to pretend to be, and I accept all these arguments and would remain saying to me that I find most of it confusing, but I just think we should be upfront and say, yes, it's going to be a bit tricky, there's going to be a lot of ins and outs and trade deals and negotiations for a couple of years, but it's going to be so worth it, and all of that is worth it 10 times over to get out of the European Union.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I always say.
Short-term pain for long-term gain.
Yeah, exactly. A couple of years of uncertainty for a lifetime of self-government's a decent trade-off, I've always thought.
Yeah, I just wish the economy wasn't the be-all and end-all of this argument, because if people could accept the fact that there probably are going to be some, at least in the short-term, economic shock and instability in the markets, I think if we could just kind of get over that and confront it, then we would be winning all the arguments had out, but that really is our Achilles heel here.
Yeah,
I would say certainly in the long term we could definitely liberalise trade with non-EU countries.
Yeah, exactly. We're not going to have on Friday morning, well, not Friday morning, but basically on Friday morning.
It won't have come in properly by Friday morning, I don't think.
I know, but in Friday morning we are theoretically not going to be having our own deal with Brazil and nothing, but in 5 years we will do.
That would be very optimistic.
It's not to say, I know, I am optimistic, but you know what I'm saying. It's not just because we won't have them in our first days as an independent country out of the EU doesn't mean we're never going to have them.
So I think
that's almost why I supported. For a while I kind of flirted with the idea of a second referendum, because I think there's so many variables.
No, that's the worst thing you could do. That's what the EU always does. Second referendums are the devil incarnate when it comes to matters.
I know. I said I flirted with it briefly. I've gone off it since, but there was one thing. I mean, there are so many variables in this. It's hard to vote on them.
That's true. Uncertainty always gives people a sort of bad gut feeling, but I always say there's a risk with freedom. But yeah, that's just a soundbite. It doesn't mean very much.
I live for soundbites.
So I think at this point, what we'll do is we'll discuss immigration. I think it's the most controversial topic. But in the meantime, there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of active users in the live chat. If you can try and come up with the most difficult questions from the perspective of Remain. And that will be great. And then we'll do a few questions after that. So try and come up with some difficult questions if you can, and I'll go through the live chat after that. But we can start on immigration.
Yeah,
so
do it.
Okay, well, I'll basically be the Remainer here because I'm so pro-immigration. I think it.
Do you want to play
pro-immigration, but we're all pro-control as well.
Do you want to play devil's advocate here instead?
Well, I mean, I won't really play devil's advocate as much as I will be saying what I think.
But in terms of immigration, I think that the main argument from the Leave side is that you have basically a point-style system already for the non-EU immigration, but you don't for the EU immigration. So at the very least, you can say that's inequitable. And at the most, you can probably say that if we had an Australian-style point system for the whole thing, then we would be able to reduce immigration. And there's a lot of people that would like to see immigration reduced because of threats to public services, yes, and so on. Opinions on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you put it well there. But one thing that I think is always skated over a little bit in this debate is that the EU is only 8% of the world's population. So, well, the figures for last year are that we took 188,000 from outside the EU, 184,000 from inside the EU, and that's the net figure. So the gross figure is slightly more. But anyway, we have such a Eurocentric immigration policy that it frustrates me. You know, Hugh Gaitskell once said, we're a global nation, we have links across the whole world and every single continent. And, you know, I don't see why a Filipino should be, a Frenchman should be prioritized over a Filipino. I fluffed my soundbite there, didn't I? An Indonesian over an Indian, a Norwegian over a New Zealander. There you go, got the soundbite out. But yeah, I just find it so inequitable and just so
really
wrong
agree.
because, you know, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, they share so much more in common with us than someone from a country we're not allied with.
Exactly. I completely agree with you, and I think it's always overlooked that people say, oh, if you're anti-immigration, you're discriminating against people
racist.
on the grounds of, you're racist. But I think, isn't it actually discriminatory and not racist, but you get my point, to favour people within the European Union over people outside the European Union just because of where they live? Like, surely the racist ones are there for the EU. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's actually the EU policy is far more discriminatory than a type, you know, the Australian style point system.
Yeah.
I mean, what you could say. What you could say if you're going to go down the equity argument, why don't we make immigration less strict for non-EU countries instead of leaving the EU and making it more strict for European countries? Can't we just have the same system that we have for non-EU countries that we have currently for EU countries?
Yeah, I think we should. And we should also set a total level. The thing is, it gets tweaked every year. It's sort of ignored because immigration is so high and that's what dominates it. But actually, our non-EU immigration policy is tweaked every year depending on what the government wants, what number it thinks is acceptable. So,
I mean, the only other argument that would ever really sway me towards controlling immigration and that being a real prime concern for me is the pragmatic arguments like pressure on public services. But I don't really believe, I mean, when people say make Britain British again, it kind of irritates me because I think multiculturalism is such a good thing and I completely welcome it. But I mean, the only arguments are the economic ones about wage cutting and pressure on public services. They're the only real things that concern me about immigration. But I don't think that, you know, we should resent other cultures coming here and integrate. Well, not.
Well, it's only if they don't integrate that it's an issue.
I think that's the point some people would make, that some cultures don't integrate as well as other cultures do. Some cultures are better at integrating.
I mean, there's certainly some groups of people who are more resistant to integration. I mean, history shows that over a very long period of time it always happens.
Types of people, not groups of people. I mean, to say all of one religion are resistant to integration is a bit unfair.
Huh? Well, I don't think so. I don't think it comes down to specific types. There are certain cultural traits that make people resistant to immigration. For example,
but I know a lot of some reclusive Muslims, and I know some reclusive white Christians. It doesn't, you know.
But it's true that lack of integration is a far bigger problem in the Muslim community than the white Christian community.
Yeah, but I mean, a desire not to integrate and to stick with your family and your immediate friends. I mean, that's not really a cultural trait. That's just.
Well, I mean, sometimes it's
personality trait.
Well, I mean, I sort of disagree.
But there's plenty of examples of Polish people and Muslims and all sorts of other cultures that are very well integrated. I think it's the exception, the ones that don't integrate.
Hmm. But you can't say it's like just types of people though. I mean, there are certain cultural reasons that people might not want to integrate.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no, there are, but I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just
This
trying to be
isn't about the
devil's
EU, is
advocate
it?
and failing miserably.
I guess this is
Again.
getting a little bit off topic anyway. But
Yeah.
one question I would like to ask is what system of immigration would you have? And I guess I don't know. Georgie is no longer a Tory supporter, but Uday is a Tory supporter. But if you could choose what immigration system you would have, what would be the sort of Leave manifesto, the thing that we're not allowed to have because we're not a political one? What immigration system would you allow to leave?
My personal manifesto. Oh, you go first. You might as well.
Well, me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, did you
Oh
do
no,
much
all the
thinking
other people on the group chat.
I hate to say I would like an Australian style point system because I've heard that phrase so many times it makes me want to stab my eyes out. But I think that is probably the best one. But like I said, if I had a choice between leaving the European Union and remaining the single market with open door immigration and remaining in without, I'd still happily participate in an open door like Norway do if it meant we were out of the political union.
Yeah.
I'd say Australian star system preferably, but if I had to put up with open door immigration in order to get out of the European Union but stay in the free market, I'd accept that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. A lot of people.
Immigration
like
is the biggest. I've said it before. Complaining about immigration in the EU is a bit like going to Syria and complaining about the weather, or going to Auschwitz and complaining about the food. It's really, for me at least, not the biggest issue in this. I wish it didn't take up so much coverage.
But that's because I mean, I don't know how much you want to trust polls, but I mean most polls show that people who are voting to leave the EU rank immigration as their number one concern.
Yeah.
And the single biggest way you can tell if someone's going to vote to leave is you ask, are you concerned about immigration? If they say fairly concerned or very concerned, they're almost definitely going to vote to leave. But I mean, I have a sort of wacky idea, which is like for
I like wacky ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's for I think Dan Hannon suggested it actually, and I love Dan. But it was for a anglospheric free movement thing. So like Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, we could have free movement with them, and then
I don't agree with that.
Have like controlled immigration for the rest of the world. But they share our language and our culture and our history and our tradition.
We already had that.
I think we should embrace different
they're
languages.
great. I mean, Australians are great.
Cultures. We shouldn't favour people because they speak the same language.
We already had that.
That is useful. You can't deny.
That's called the Commonwealth.
We already had a Commonwealth free movement, which I think was abolished in 1968. So that already had existed, and there must have been a reason that it was abolished. But as far as I'm aware, before 1968, that was a thing. Free movement.
It was the thing.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
I didn't know that.
But that's why I'm not suggesting the whole Commonwealth. I mean, the Commonwealth, as in terms of population, is pretty huge. That's why I suggest it to those countries which are like 50 million between them. Not very much at all. But yeah, I know. I just really like Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders. And, they're just great. And they're effectively just like cousins that live on different islands or different continents.
I think I just warm to people. I mean, regardless if they're Canadian or, I think, like I said, traits are not a cultural thing. They're just personality traits. I don't think that I wouldn't favour a Canadian any more than I would favour a German or a French person, as long as, I mean, in an economic sense, if they're the person for the job or the nicest person, location doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, fair enough. I suppose.
I'm getting a bit generalised.
It's
ideological now, but
yeah, it is. I don't know. Well, I only said that because I just thought there was something. I think there's something a little bit deeper about shared communities and shared values. And that sort of thing. But I mean,
what you mean. I think
to be honest, it's just a theoretical manifesto.
I think
we aren't going to be in power anytime.
If we're gonna favour any countries. We should probably favour countries like Canada or Australia that we have historical and more cultural ties to than we do, say, Greece or Spain, and countries that we're not as having the common with. I do get that.
Allied.
Like, if we're going to discriminate at all, we should be discriminating towards countries that we have more in common with than not. But
fair enough. Yeah, no, I get you. Yeah. Come on, Q.
So I
Come on, David Dimbleby.
Okay, so
Dimblebot.
I kind of wanted to finish this with questions and answers from the audience, and there's been some really quite horrible ones. I mean, there's this really specific.
Really?
There's a really specific one. I'm not sure anyone will know the answer to this, but I'll go with it anyways. Someone said, I want to know whether leave will affect the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1373. Will it still be valid?
No, it will still be valid. Portugal's been our oldest ally. See, I know something about this because I did a little bit of international relations.
How do you know that, Christ?
Well,
I'm just lost for words of how impressed I am that you knew what that was.
Oh well, basically Portugal's our oldest ally, and I think the Treaty of 37 was. I can't remember if it was the first, but anyway, the point is Britain's been allied with Portugal for many years. Plus, it's also no longer in effect. It's a historical treaty. I think it's a mutual non-aggression pact or something like that, and it says that if Britain or Portugal's invade, the other will come to their aid. But like NATO. But yeah. I don't think it'll be affected anyway. I think it's been superseded a long time ago.
I'm embarrassed to be studying history as an undergraduate next year after that.
Yeah, well, you'll enjoy Durham anyway. It'll be fun.
But well, I think I have no idea what that was. I'm completely ignorant about this.
Oh
but,
my god, guys! I was kind of right because it's the oldest alliance in the world. Yeah.
There we are.
It's still
you're getting a lot of praise in the chat for your answer, Uday.
Can you send the link for the chat? Cause I wanna look at the chat.
Okay.
I want to see when you said
I'll put the link in the thing on the right. But I guess a question that a lot of Remainers ask is not about that, but about the common free the free movement area between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and what will happen if there's going to be a Brexit. Will there be a border erected on Northern Ireland? I think that's something people are worried about.
Oh my god, Castrajo67 says that he loves me. Yes. Yeah. Oh, it's Carlos. Classic Carlos. Sorry, I'm getting such.
So, yeah, but we'll finish. Yeah, I shouldn't have linked you to the chat. It's just going to distract everyone. But what do people?
I know I can't see it. I'm blissfully ignorant. I don't want to get abuse.
But
you're not getting abuse.
You're
getting praise, Georgie. You're raking on praise.
Well, what do people think about Northern Ireland then? If you leave the EU, will a border be erected between Northern Ireland and EU?
No.
No, and I think suggesting that if we leave the EU, the Troubles are going to restart it, as Tony Blair and John Major did the other week, is just absolutely mental and really quite embarrassing for them, and really scraping the barrel for reasons to vote. I mean, we're far too civilized. We are British. This is not going to happen. And I think also these things are just irrelevant. I think this is not a general election. This is a referendum on kind of like a concept. These are things that once we've decided whether we're in or out will be discussed. I think they're variables. That's kind of why I thought about a second referendum for a while. That they shouldn't be what makes up people's minds in this.
Unless
if we don't have manifestos, that
Although Leave have
question
been
for after Thursday.
They've oh sorry, I've lost my words. Vote Leave have been putting out a sort of bit of a manifesto. I mean, they've checked out a couple of policies. But the Irish question is an interesting one. But we had free movement with Ireland, for 100 years before we joined.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have a very different relationship with Ireland, as in it is effectively a semi-political union.
Yeah, that's unique to any other European member state. Yeah.
And I can't think of any other countries which have such a close relationship but aren't a country themselves. My point on the Irish question is that I don't think there would be a border erected. I think that would be silly and counterproductive. And of course, the First Minister of Northern Ireland.
Should we build walls like Donald Trump?
No, please don't.
Build a wall.
We're going to build a wall. It's going to be so great.
It's going to be huge.
No, that would be a very, very bad move. But Theresa Villiers and Arlene Foster have both said that it wouldn't disrupt the peace process. But I mean, the idea that you could sort of go. So if we had free movement with Ireland, there was this idea mooted that loads of people would go into Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, go into Northern Ireland, catch a ferry. I mean, I don't think that would work because they wouldn't be registered. They wouldn't have any details or paperwork or cards or anything like that. So they would only be able to work in the black economy.
No, that's another Remain scaremongering myth. That's not.
I mean, it's just like, you know, if you know, someone comes into our shores from, I don't know, Albania, say, and decides that they want to come here. I mean, they're not going to get very far because if they haven't been taken in through the correct channels, it's not going to work out so well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's asking, again, I haven't seen this. Have you seen the Jamie Oliver video on the European Union?
Oh, don't tell me Jamie Oliver's got involved.
Is that the one where he's talking with Peter?
Oh, God.
Well, I don't know anything about this.
I've seen a video of him at a select committee talking to Peter Bone, who is a legend, and saying, I don't like the EU because they label things wrongly. Something to do with food, but, you know. Love Jamie.
Oh, I really hope Jamie Oliver hasn't injected himself into another political campaign because he's really ruining a lot of his recipes for me.
Has he? Well, I'm not going to be such a fan of David Beckham after today, I don't think.
Oh, no.
And or Posh Spice, because she was such a Eurosceptic like 20 years ago, and now she's like, ooh, Remain.
I can't tell you I'm an expert on Posh Spice's political views, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, there's a video somewhere. Maybe we can watch it after this has ended. But yeah.
Debating all the highbrow issues here.
Yeah, I know.
There's another question. I don't know if you two have seen this, but there's another question on the Sargon of Akkad versus Thunderfoot debate, which took place yesterday. I think maybe this question is addressed to me. My opinion on this debate is that I thought Thunderfoot's contribution to Remain was quite weak in his video format, but I thought he performed extremely well in the debate. And I thought he was definitely the better debater out.
Sorry, what debate was this?
So this was a debate between two quite popular YouTubers. I'll link to this in the description. A guy called Thunderfoot and a guy called Sargon of Akkad. They're both debating on Brexit. They're both sort of conservative, libertarian type individuals, hardline atheist type sphere. But Thunderfoot's a scientist who works in the Czech Republic. He made a very convincing case in favour of the EU. I've had to think about it, and I think some of the arguments he made are flawed, but it was a strong performance, I think. That's not to say, incidentally, to people that have been asking in the chat, everyone here is unless I'm very much mistaken, voting Leave. But
I don't think we're going to lose, but I'm going to vote for it anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought Thunderfoot did well in that debate. But I think some of his arguments are still misleading. But yeah, so I think that's basically all the questions. Do you two want to maybe make some concluding remarks, and then we'll go on?
You're going to make us do closing statements,
yes,
like
indeed. Yes, indeed, I will.
The democracy.
Uday, you're first.
Okay. Right. Okay. Hang on. Okay. The right to elect the people who make your laws, then kick them out after 5 years if you don't like them, or choose to hold on to them if you do like what they've done, is one of the most inalienable rights that we possess. And it's the most precious right we possess because it's secured our liberty, our security, and our economic progress. The EU removes that right from you. Ask yourself, can you name any of the 5 presidents of the European institutions? Most people can name the Prime Minister, some might be able to name the Chancellor, but the point is the people who rule over us are elected, and we can get rid of them if we don't like them. In a permanent bureaucracy like the EU, you lose that control. So I'll urge you all to vote Leave and take control on the 25th of June. I'm going to do that like a politician. Yeah.
I think my closing statement is just going to be, I'm with you, Uday.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
I think basically if you wouldn't elect a government that promised more centralisation, decisions taken further away from you, unlimited immigration, standardisation of all policies, and all the other horrific things that the European Union want to impose on us, then why would you vote for them in this referendum? I know I've said it's not a general election, but if you wouldn't accept those qualities in a national government, why should we make an exception at a European level? We shouldn't have to stand for it. You wouldn't stand for it if the Tories or Labour did it. So why should we stand for this?
Hang on, just keep talking for 1 minute, 1 sec. Just try. I'm going to play Jerusalem, and then it's all going to be amazing. Okay.
Are we having theme music?
I'll abandon that. It would be nice if we could like go out on like a theme Jerusalem. It's alright. It's fine. I've had lots of fun anyway. I'm amazed that it's been an hour already.
And what about David Dimbleby? Where's your closing statement?
David Dimbleby never has a closing.
We can be biased.
David Dimbleby never has a closing statement. Okay, my case for leaving the EU, I think the strongest case personally is economic. I think that the problem that we have with the European Union is that it's a protectionist bloc. When we joined the European Union in the 70s, the whole world, and especially the UK, was quite nationalistic and it was quite protectionist, and it nationalised all the industries. So it made sense for us to join a single market, a free market. But now we kind of have the opposite situation where the WTO brings down tariffs, the world is becoming more free generally in terms of trade. So it makes what did make sense potentially in the 70s makes no sense now. We should get out of the European Union and trade more liberally with the whole world, and indeed we should take back control. We don't need to be in a political union for any of this. So
absolutely not.
So there we go. So yes, I'm going to.
Julie's just left. She's just a floating thumb.
But yeah, I'm gonna close it now. So this video will be available on YouTube afterwards. Feel free to share the link around, particularly if there are any people that are undecided. I don't think this will convince any Remainers, but if there are any people that are undecided, please share this video. And I will. People have asked about this. I will link the Twitter accounts of the people on this afterwards. So we'll do that. So thanks everyone for joining. Hope you've enjoyed.